EU leaders had no interest in Britain.
Right, good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Here it is the evening, it's dark, and I've got an exciting video here, which is Brexit, the rise and fall of the EU. They're talking about the history. They made it 12th of March, and George Galloway and Garrie, I've not come across him before, but he's very good. I watched the whole of it. Excellent, excellent video. Thank you to all my subscribers, or all the subscribers. Thank you for the commenters, very interesting comments. Thanks for the link that was sent. I will plan to use that, very interesting. And of course May is a globalist, and so is her husband. And let's start with this.
I'm George Galloway.
And I'm Garrie.
And together we are the History Boys, because history is in the making. Indeed, all the time history is in the making. But there's seldom been a more auspicious week coming up in British politics. Within hours, actually, Britain, in its parliament at least, will decide whether or not the Brexit decision made by 17.4 million British people is to go ahead, and on what basis. And in a matter of days, not weeks, certainly not months, Britain will leave the European Union, all other things being equal. It's momentous by any standards, but remarkably, it's not dominating the popular discourse. The presence of some dozens of Islamophobic conservative councillors, or some dozens or a couple of hundred anti-Semitic Labour supporters, has completely dominated the British political discourse this week. That and the ongoing coup against Jeremy Corbyn. Yet this history-making event, as I say, is just a matter of hours ahead of us. Adam, I announced the formation of a Brexit alliance because if Article 50 is extended next week, if it's extended by long enough, we'll have to fight the European Parliament elections. And given that it would be utterly pointless, would change nothing, alter the course of nothing, to vote for one of the mainstream parties to go back to the European Parliament, as almost to a man and woman, the Labourites, for example, are an extreme case of Stockholm Syndrome, completely captive of the EU. Other candidates will have to emerge. And given the rather toxic state of UKIP, which played a big part in getting the referendum in the first place, which is now painting its faces with anti-Islamic and anti-immigrant tropes, there might well need to be a different, wholly different raft of candidates coming forward. We'll, I'm sure, touch on that in the course of this discussion.
Now, just to say there that Nigel Farage, who started UKIP, he was a businessman, is a businessman, but came out to actually set up UKIP. When we got the referendum, he left the political scene, and he's an MEP, but he also very recently set up the Brexit Party. So there is somebody there who want to leave this European Union.
But let's look back first into the, if you like, the genesis of this whole issue, because, of course, in the beginning, Britain had no interest whatsoever of joining the common market, which became the EU. The EU leaders had no interest in Britain joining them, and only in 1973, without any popular referenda at all, Edward Heath took us into a common market, which turned out to be not really a market at all, but a putative, undemocratic federal state. We only got a referendum in 1970.
Yes, an undemocratic federal state. That's really what the European so-called Union, which now the majority of countries, maybe the only one that's not is Spain, but the majority of countries, the people in those countries are building political parties that will take them out. Europe will collapse in a heap. The sooner we can get out, the better.
After the fact, I was active in that referendum. We lost heavily and Britain remained in, but we've only ever been half in, half out, haven't we?
Absolutely right. Whether it's things like the rebate, which goes back to the 80s, whether it's Tony Blair's great attempt to reform the European Union, which failed as badly as his attempt to reform Iraq,
the city of London,
and the city of London, and Afghanistan, and Yugoslavia.
We could go on.
A string of failures that Blair left behind. But the whole attitude of Britain's membership in Europe has been a bit like someone trying to take bad medicine. And then when it came to fruition that most people thought that the bad medicine wasn't medicine at all, but was in fact poison, Britain reverted to its initial position. People have to remember that even though the phrase United States of Europe was popularized in the late 1940s by a man we know all too well, Sir Winston Churchill, when you read not only the speech in which he first uttered the phrase, but when you read other things that he said and wrote about the subject, he didn't see Britain as being part of this United States of Europe.
He wanted them to be a United States.
Absolutely. And that's a key point that a lot of people forget, especially those who in the Remain campaign of 2016 plastered Winston Churchill all over the very un-Churchillian cause.
Yes, very interesting. And also the point about rather bitter medicine, and realised that this bitter medicine wasn't medicine, that actually it was poison. Very important point.
Over their non-bus. Now, Macmillan made the initial approach to join in the early 1960s. President de Gaulle was rather resolute in his no, no, no.
Well, in those days, both sides could be accused of a lot, but they couldn't be accused of being dishonest. Britain barely hid the fact that for the majority of people, they didn't want to know about this European project. They didn't care about it. They had other things on their mind. Rationing was only yesteryear's memory, and so Britain...
Yes, rationing. We've just got over rationing.
Britain was approaching the world, imperial decline, questions of what the Commonwealth, then called the British Commonwealth, what its identity and purpose was going to be. This was much more at the forefront of serious political thought than this Project Europe, and it was indeed the United States that more or less begged, some would say coerced, Britain to try to get into this club, to do exactly what de Gaulle didn't want Britain to do, which is to Anglicize it, Atlanticize it. But de Gaulle at the time said no, and a lot of people in Britain agreed. Some would have called that a win-win, but of course it was a big embarrassment for Macmillan, and then when Mr. Profumo stuck his head above the parapet accidentally...
stuck his head or somewhere else. Above the parapet or somewhere else.
Indeed.
Now, Labour in those days was resolutely opposed to this European project. Even the right-wing leader, Hugh Gaitskell, but also Harold Wilson was deeply ambivalent about it, and giants of the Labour Party, Michael Foot, Tony Benn, Peter Shore, Barbara Castle, later Brian Gould, were actually thoroughly opposed to it, root and branch.
Absolutely. They opposed it at a philosophical level. They made strong economic arguments for their opposition. And the perverse thing about looking at what the contemporary events through this historical lens is that in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s, even into the 90s, it was only fringe members of the Conservative Party who were stridently anti-Europe, stridently Eurosceptic. The mainstream Euroscepticism in Britain for all of that period was in Labour, mostly on the left, but also in the centre. And as you say, in terms of Gaitskell, it was one of the only areas in which he and the Bevanite left were agreed. On just about everything else, they couldn't agree. But on this fundamental issue, Labour were quite united, even though beginning with Wilson, there was a mild shift in the leadership trying to toe a middle line. That, of course, shifted back to hard Euroscepticism under Michael Foot, a man who, if he was alive today, would almost certainly be campaigning beside the late Tony Benn, for a true Brexit, not some watered-down halfway house.
That's so interesting, because really, now you've got quite a lot of Conservatives who are Brexiteers, Rees-Mogg being one of them, and Boris Johnson.
I was there, I don't look old enough, but I was there when Labour began to shift. It's the D word, Delors. The Labour movement had taken one hell of a beating from Margaret Thatcher. On the industrial front, the unions. On the political front, with Thatcherization of everything, privatization, deregulation, and so on. And along came this figure. He was there today or yesterday and gone very quickly, Jacques Delors.
Now, just to add into the discussion, I've got the Great Awakening link up, and I'm just going to read a bit. The end of the European Union, the no Brexit deal, the start of the RV, and knowledge is power. The EU has grown into a malignant economic cancer. Will the fall of the EU be the biggest event in modern-day financial history? Most likely, yes. When the Brexit domino does fall, it will unleash a series of unstoppable events that will culminate in the fall of the EU. Also, on today's Restored Republic, on Friday, March the 29th, Judy Byington has written here, this is on Restored Republic, the link will be in the description box, the European exit, in brackets Brexit, from the Euro, or European Union, will take away the cabals, that's the criminal bankers, take away the cabal's last bastion of rule over the global financial system by officially closing the Queen's Bank of London on March the 29th. Banks had a deadline to be Basel III compliant by March the 29th, or they would not be participating in the global currency reset, that's reset to gold standard. Some say that the Bank of International Settlements planned to announce the gold-stroke asset-backed currency standard on March the 29th. Others say the new global asset-backed currency system would be announced on August the 1st and put in force January 2020. Now, Monday, April the 1st, transition into the new gold asset-backed quantum financial system was scheduled for April the 1st. By the international law, gold-backed digital credits must come online in central banks by Friday, April the 12th. A new US taxpayer plan should be out by Monday, April the 1st. So there we have it. You could also say that this whole thing, both in America and also in Britain, is really a focusing of good rising up against evil. That is really the essence of it. And of course that very much talks about we've been enslaved in a evil financial system. God bless, love and light to you all, and there'll be a part 2 of this taking us further along this history of Brexit, or the EU, or Britain and the EU. God bless, bye-bye. Catania Alvin. I'm adding a coda here and continuing to read. Most likely the majority of people, at least many of them, have no idea how radically this shaking out process is affecting their prosperity. The entire global economy is going to suffer a massive transformation because today's interconnected as information travels much faster. The effects of a big economic shock will immediately flood across the world. In other words, no one, wherever they may reside on the planet, will be safe just because they don't live in Europe. The EU experiment has grown into a malignant economic cancer. Well, we've read that. God bless you all. Catania Alvin signing out again. Bye-bye.